The rain that night was merciless. It pounded against the windows of the orphanage like a warning, like it already knew what kind of life was waiting for me beyond the storm. I was 5 when the police arrived, faces solemn, clothes soaked through. They didn't need to say much. My world had already ended. My parents had died in a car accident. Their vehicle swept off the highway and into a ravine. They said it was quick, painless. I never believed them. No relatives came forward. No one claimed me. Within weeks, I was another forgotten file at the edge of a crowded system. The orphanage on the outskirts of Boston wasn't cruel, but it wasn't warm either. We had beds, meals, occasional hugs from staff who came and went. But what we didn't have was love, the kind that wrapped you in its arms and whispered you're mine. I spent years waiting for someone to see me, to choose me. And then, one spring afternoon, they did. They arrived like characters from another planet, Elaine and Richard Hawthorne. She wore sunglasses inside and spoke in soft, rehearsed tones. He didn't say much, just watched me like he was buying stock. The staff said it was a miracle. I called it a transaction. Still, I packed my things, clutched my worn, stuffed rabbit, and stepped into a life I couldn't yet imagine. Their estate was a fortress of luxury, gated, guarded, grand in every possible way. Chandeliers taller than trees. A chef who prepared art on plates. Tutors who spoke 3 languages. My room was beautiful, soft sheets, polished floors, a view of a private garden. But the silence inside that mansion was a whole different kind of storm. They never called me daughter. I was introduced as a family ward or a special circumstance. The staff was instructed to be respectful, but not affectionate. At public events, I was to remain poised, silent, invisible unless addressed. If I mentioned the orphanage or my parents, Elaine's eyes would narrow, and Richard's voice would chill into something close to a threat. I learned to perform. My every word was rehearsed, my posture perfect. I studied how they moved, how they spoke. I was desperate to blend in to earn even a flicker of genuine care. But no matter how well I played the role, I always felt like a background character in someone else's show. My name was Clara, but even that felt borrowed. Then in college, I met him. He walked into the lecture, late hair, damp coat, clinging to him from the sudden April storm. But his smile, it was as if he didn't even notice the weather. Liam Prescott. He sat next to me without hesitation and leaned over to ask, "You here for the free snacks or the trauma bonding?" It was such a stupid, honest question that I laughed for the first time in weeks. We talked for hours that day about psychology, about the way people mask pain, about music and books and rain. When he asked about my past, I braced for the usual awkward silence. But Liam just nodded when I told him. "You survived," he said. "That's not something to hide. That's power." From that moment, something shifted. He didn't care who had adopted me. He cared about who I was when the world wasn't looking. With Liam, I wasn't a project. I wasn't a polished doll in a glass house. I was just Clara, messy, unsure, and completely real. We dated for 3 years. I met his friends. We built Rituals coffee at dawn movies on the couch, dancing barefoot in the kitchen. He gave me peace in a world that only respected presentation. But the closer we grew, the more I noticed the distance in his answers. When I asked about his family, "They're traditional," he'd say. "Not like us." At first, I thought love would be enough to bridge any gap. But love, as I'd already learned, isn't always louder than silence. And Liam's silence about his family began to sound like a warning I couldn't ignore. Clara's hands were trembling. though she hid them beneath the crisp folds of her navy blue dress. The restaurant glowed with chandeliers shaped like melting stars. Every glass sparkled. Every plate looked like it belonged in a museum. Liam squeezed her hand once, then released it, as they approached the table near the window, where his parents already sat waiting. His mother, Meredith Prescott, was the first to look up. Her expression didn't change. Perfect posture, subtle pearl's eyes that scanned Clara like she was inventory. Beside her sat Liam's father, Charles, quiet but tense, his fingers laced on the table, as if guarding a negotiation. "Mom, Dad, this is Clara," Liam said, trying for warmth. "Of course," Meredith replied, standing to offer a single-pump handshake. "We've heard. A bit." Charles nodded, then gestured for them to sit. "Nice to finally meet you," he said flatly. "We were beginning to think Liam was ashamed of us." Clara smiled politely, her back straight, like she'd been trained. But that first jab wasn't lost on her. Neither was Meredith's slow glance from her modest earrings down to her dress, pausing just long enough to register its department store origin. The server arrived with menus, wine lists, a flicker of ease until Meredith spoke again. "Clara, dear, what is it you do? I'm interning at a counseling center," Clara answered with a quiet steadiness. "We focus on trauma recovery in adolescents and young adults." "Counseling," Meredith repeated, tilting her head as if hearing a foreign word. "So, you listen to people for a living. I listen, but I also help them build healthier coping tools, address patterns." "How admirable," Meredith interrupted. "Such a kind, humble field." She didn't say it outright, but the way her voice hovered over the word humble stripped it of any kindness. It wasn't praise. It was condescension in pearls and perfume. Charles cleared his throat. "And your family? What do they do?" Clara felt the familiar heat climb her neck. She glanced at Liam. He looked down at the table, avoiding her eyes. "I was adopted," she said simply. "I don't know much about my biological family. My adoptive parents are in real estate." "Oh," Meredith perked up slightly. "Which firm private holdings?" Clara answered. "They prefer discretion." The silence that followed was sharp, sterile. Meredith's smile returned, but it no longer reached her eyes. "I see," she said, taking a long sip from her wine glass. Liam shifted in his seat. "Clara's being modest," he began. "Her adoptive family's been very supportive. She's worked hard, really." "Yes," I'm sure Charles said, cutting him off without looking at Clara. "But some things can't be taught, Liam. Background upbringing. Those things matter." Clara stared at her water glass, the condensation running like tears she refused to shed. "I think what my father means," Liam said, his voice tightening, "is that this family has certain traditions," Meredith added with a sigh, "and certain expectations. Liam, you've always had a soft heart, but marriage isn't about sentiment. It's about continuity." "I'm not a disruption," Clara said quietly. "I care about Liam, and I've never asked for anything from your family." "You misunderstand," Meredith replied. "This isn't about asking. It's about fitting." She smiled as if delivering a compliment. "And I think we can all agree not everything fits just because we wish it to." Liam placed his hand over Clara's beneath the table, but the gesture was faint, hesitant. "That's enough, Mom." Meredith didn't flinch. "I only want what's best for you." "And what if I already have it?" he asked. But the silence afterward told Clara everything. Liam had stood up, yes, but not all the way. Not in a way that counted. When the check came, Meredith reached for it immediately. "We'll cover it," she said. "It's the least we can do." Clara thanked her. and this time Meredith did not smile. As they walked out into the cool night, Clara whispered, "That wasn't dinner. That was inspection." Liam didn't argue. He just said, "I'm sorry," and kept walking. The invitation arrived printed on thick, embossed cardstock, with golden trim like it was crafted for royalty. Clara read it twice, her fingers tracing the calligraphy that spelled out the words, "Meredith and Charles Prescott request the pleasure of your company to celebrate their 35th wedding anniversary." Her name wasn't printed on the invite, just Liam Prescott and guest. Still she went. She wore a soft ivory dress, elegant, but understated. Her hair was pinned in a low bun, her makeup light, but precise. Clara had no illusions about the crowd she was walking into. This wasn't just a party. It was a statement, a performance. And she was the uninvited script change. The Prescott estate looked like something off a lifestyle magazine cover. Manicured lawns, string lights crisscrossing the hedges, live violinists at the gate. Guests in designer gowns sipped champagne, while servers floated by with trays of lobster canapes and foie gras. Liam held her hand. As they walked through the garden, his grip tighter than usual. When they entered the courtyard, conversation slowed. Heads turned. Some guests gave polite nods, others only curious stares. And a few, like the woman in emerald green near the bar, looked Clara up and down before whispering something behind a glass of wine. A woman. Liam's Aunt Clara guest brushed past and muttered just loud enough for them to hear. Did someone bring their assistant tonight? Clara didn't flinch. She had spent years being invisible in fancy rooms, but Liam did. His jaw clenched and his steps became stiffer. They reached the main seating area. Dozens of white-clothed tables were arranged in a semicircle around the garden fountain. Each table was filled, every seat, every chair accounted for. Clara looked around, confused. So did Liam. That's when Meredith appeared, dressed in a shimmering silver gown, holding a flute of champagne, with delicate indifference. "Oh, Liam," she said with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "You two should have arrived earlier. Such a shame all the tables are full now." Liam blinked. "We RSVP'd a month ago." Meredith sipped her drink. "Well, you know how things go, but I believe there are folding chairs in the kitchen if you're comfortable with that." Clara didn't say a word. She just stared at the polished stone beneath her heels, where her shadow looked shorter than it ever had. Mom, Liam said sharply, "Are you serious? I'm simply being practical," Meredith replied, turning away like the discussion was done. "There's a buffet near the east wing if you're hungry." Clara turned to Liam, searching his face. He looked wrecked, embarrassed, angry, but mostly torn. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "For what?" she asked quietly. "For bringing me, or for not standing up to them?" He didn't answer. He just looked away, jaw tight, as if calculating which discomfort was worse, hers or his mother's. Finally, he took her hand. "Let's go." They walked out the way they came back, through the glowing garden, under eyes that pretended not to see them leave. No one stopped them. No one said goodbye. In the car, the silence was louder than the party music they'd left behind. Clara stared out the window, watching the city lights blur into streaks. "That was humiliating," Liam finally said. "Yes," she replied. "I didn't think they'd go that far." "You hoped they wouldn't," she corrected. "That's not the same." He didn't argue. Back at the apartment, Liam disappeared into the bedroom. Clara stood in the living room, still in her dress arms wrapped around herself. In that moment, she realized something painful. Liam wanted her in his life, but only in the parts he controlled. Not the messy ones, not the family ones. She had fought her whole life to be accepted to belong somewhere without bending into someone else's shape. And tonight, all she had done was shrink again. She took off the heels, set them by the door, and sat on the couch alone. Not because she was tired, but because she needed to remember how it felt to take up space. The quiet that settled over their apartment after the party wasn't peaceful. It was poisonous. Clara could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, even the faint buzz of traffic below their window. But not Liam. He hadn't spoken since they walked through the door. She sat on the edge of the couch, still in her dress. Her feet were bare, her hair beginning to unravel from the bun she'd pinned hours ago. It had been one of those nights you didn't just remember, you felt it like a bruise under the skin. Liam came out of the bedroom with his sleeves rolled up, phone in hand, face flushed with anger. But it wasn't directed at the people who'd mocked her. "You didn't have to act like that," he said without looking at her. Clara blinked. Like what? So cold. So stiff. You didn't even try to talk to anyone. You just stood there like you were doing them a favor. "I was trying not to cry in front of 100 strangers," she said quietly. He scoffed, running a hand through his hair. "That's not the point, Clara. It was one night. You could have just smiled, nodded, played along. Now they think you're difficult. They think I'm nothing," she replied, her voice cracking. "And you let them." Liam turned to her now fully. "I let them. I walked out with you, didn't I? I left my parents' anniversary party for you." "No," she said. "You left because you were embarrassed. You didn't speak up until there were folding chairs involved." "That's not fair," he snapped. "But it's true." He paced, breathing heavier now. "Do you know how hard this is for me? I'm stuck between the woman I love and the family I grew up with." "Then maybe you should choose," Clara said. Liam's eyes widened. "That's not a choice anyone should have to make." Clara stood. "I've already made mine. I chose you. I keep choosing you, even when your mother humiliates me, even when your family pretends I'm invisible. I stay. I smile. I try. And I didn't ask you to do that. You didn't have to." She looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. "I wanted to believe you'd do the same for me. But all I see is a man who's afraid of his mother more than he's afraid of losing me." Liam said nothing for a long moment. His jaw worked, but no words came out. Then he finally muttered, "They raised me, Clara. They're the people who shaped me. You don't just toss them aside. And I'm the person you promised to build a future with. You're making this too black and white." "No, Liam. You are. You just don't want to admit which side you've picked." His phone buzzed. He glanced at it. His mother's name lit up the screen. He declined the call and turned back to Clara, his voice quieter now. "Maybe you just need to try harder. Show them you belong." Her heart cracked, not because of what he said, but because somewhere in her past, she might have believed that too. "I've spent my whole life trying to belong," she said, "but not anymore. Not like this." Liam's silence answered more than his words ever could. She turned, walked into the bedroom, and closed the door. Behind her, she could hear the low hum of the TV turning on the familiar sound of him drowning discomfort in background noise. But Clara wasn't background. Not anymore. That night, she slept alone, still in her dress. Her heart folding inward, not from defeat, but from the realization that love without courage is just another form of loneliness. Clara knew better than to expect warmth, but she hadn't expected open war either. It was a Tuesday night, and Meredith Prescott had invited them to dinner again more formally this time, with printed menus and a private chef. The table was long and gleaming, set for 12. Silverware arranged like weapons. Every member of the Prescott family was there, including extended relatives, who wore their lineage like armor. Clara wore a navy blouse and pearl earrings. Her smile was tight, rehearsed. She took her seat next to Liam, who offered a reassuring glance, but not his hand. Dinner began with small talk. Stocks, real estate, someone's new lake house. Clara stayed quiet, waiting for her chance to blend in. She nodded politely, answered when addressed, and even complimented the roasted duck, but halfway through the meal, the air shifted. Meredith set down her glass with a deliberate clink, folding her hands as she glanced around the table. "It's just when we talk about future plans," she said, "I can't help but wonder what legacy our children will carry." Clara stiffened. Liam stopped chewing. "What do you mean by that?" he asked carefully. Meredith tilted her head. "Well, take Clara, for example. Lovely girl, but an orphan with no traceable background, no medical history, no ancestry." Someone at the table chuckled. Another cleared their throat. Clara's hands curled into fists beneath the linen napkin. "I don't think that's relevant," Liam said, his voice tighter now. "Oh, Liam." Meredith continued with a soft, patronizing smile. "You're sentimental. But marriages like this, they don't just affect the couple. They shape family lines. Our name." Clara spoke then, voice low but steady. "With all due respect, my past doesn't define my worth. I may not come from a pedigree, but I know who I am." The table went still. Meredith's smile vanished. "I wasn't trying to offend you," she said, "but self-awareness is important. People should know where they stand." Liam opened his mouth, then closed it again. His hand hovered on the table, but didn't reach for hers. "I'm sitting at your table," Clara said, lifting her chin. "I know exactly where I stand." Meredith gave a dry laugh. "If you truly did, you would have excused yourself long ago." The words hit like ice water. Clara felt her stomach twist, but she refused to look away. She turned to Liam. "Are you going to say something?" He stared at his plate, then slowly reached for his wallet. At first, she didn't understand, but then he pulled out a folded bill, hundreds maybe, and placed it gently in her palm. "Just go home, Clara," he whispered. "Please, don't make this worse." Her heart didn't break. It stopped. She looked at the cash, then at him, at the man who once promised to fight for her. Now he couldn't even raise his voice. Clara stood her chair, scraping loudly across the marble floor. "I'm not a mistake you pay to disappear," she said, laying the bills on the table in front of Meredith. "And I don't need your money. I need my husband to act like one." No one responded. Even Liam couldn't meet her eyes. She walked out on her own, head-high, chest burning. Behind her, laughter resumed in patches. The knives clinked again. The world spun on unbothered. Outside, the air was sharp and unkind, but Clara breathed it in like freedom, because in that moment she wasn't just leaving a dinner. She was leaving a man too weak to love her aloud, a family too proud to see beyond bloodlines, and a life that had tried to cage her worth behind last names and inheritance charts. She walked until the lights of the house faded behind her, and then she didn't look back. The lights in Clara's apartment felt too bright that night, almost theatrical, as if her pain were meant to be spotlighted. She sat alone on the couch, still in the outfit she wore to dinner, her hands motionless in her lap. The silence around her wasn't empty. It was heavy. It held the weight of everything she had refused to say at that table. She stared at the wedding photo on the wall, her smile frozen in time, beside a man who had just tried to pay her to leave. She needed someone who wouldn't flinch, who wouldn't ask her to justify her own pain. So she called Evelyn. Her adoptive mother answered on the second ring, the backdrop of their Swiss hotel visible in the video feed. Evelyn was dressed in a sleek black blazer, clearly mid-meeting. But when she saw Clara's face, everything else disappeared. "What happened?" she asked, voice-tight eyes, scanning her daughter's pale expression. Clara didn't sob. She didn't shout. She simply told the truth. Every word, every insult, every passive-aggressive smirk Meredith had cast her way. And then she recounted the worst part, Liam sliding money into her hand, like she was a problem to solve. Evelyn's face went still. A frightening calm settled in her features. She slowly reached out of frame and closed the laptop in front of her. On the other side of the room, Gregory Hawthorne appeared, eyes locked on the screen. "He gave you what he asked," his voice sharp. Clara repeated it without emotion. Gregory nodded once. "We're coming home." 3 days later, the Hawthornes returned. They didn't fly commercial. A private jet touched down before sunrise. Clara met them at a quiet cafe by the Hudson, the place she used to go when she needed to breathe. Evelyn stepped out first and embraced her daughter tightly, her perfume as familiar as the way she smoothed Clara's hair, like she was still a child. Gregory didn't say much. He didn't have to. The way he looked at her eyes, fierce jaw clenched, said everything. "Did they know who you were?" Evelyn asked as they sat. Clara shook her head. "I never told them. I didn't want to be accepted for the Hawthorne name. I wanted them to accept me for me." Gregory looked at her, then at Evelyn. "They chose rejection. Now they'll learn who they dismissed." That weekend was Patrick Prescott Sr.'s 70th birthday, a black tie affair hosted at a luxury hotel in Manhattan's Upper East Side. The Prescott name drew CEOs, senators, and enough paparazzi to make headlines. Clara hadn't planned to attend, but Evelyn insisted. "You're not going to that party as a broken woman," she said. "You're walking in as a Hawthorne." Clara entered the ballroom between her parents, dressed in a tailored emerald gown. Evelyn, elegant as ever, held her arm, while Gregory walked ahead with quiet authority. The moment Meredith saw them, her expression soured. She stood near the champagne fountain, clearly unprepared for the confrontation. "Madison," she said, forcing a smile. "I didn't realize you'd be attending." Clara smiled politely. "You invited me, and these are my parents," she replied, locking eyes with Meredith. "Evelyn and Gregory Hawthorne." The shift in the room was instant. A murmur swept through the guests like a wave. Patrick, Liam's father, froze mid-conversation. Liam's mouth dropped open. Gregory stepped forward and placed a crisp folder on the table beside the birthday cake. "These," he said coolly, "are divorce papers. Signed by our lawyers this morning." Liam stood up stunned. "Wait. What you've made it clear, Madison has nothing to hold on to in this marriage," Gregory said. "And I won't allow my daughter to remain in a home that treats her like charity." Evelyn added, voice calm but razor sharp. "You insulted her for having no name. Tonight, you learn the name you scorned could have changed your world." No one spoke. Not even Meredith. Clara stood still, her head high, the ballroom lights shining down on her like justice. This wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. The ballroom confrontation became the spark that lit an inferno. Within hours, word of what happened at the Prescott patriarch's birthday party had spread through every corner of Manhattan's social elite. Someone had filmed the moment Gregory Hawthorne laid the divorce papers on the table. Another captured Evelyn's chilling remark about names, worth, and dignity. By the following morning, those clips had surfaced on financial forums, private social circles, even luxury lifestyle blogs. And in a city where reputation was currency, the Prescott empire began to lose value. At first, they tried to contain it. A vague press release about personal matters and family restructuring, but nothing could compete with the image of Clara, once dismissed as an orphan, with no background walking out of that party, between two of the most powerful names in real estate. Investors started backing out quietly. A tech firm pulled their joint venture proposal. An overseas bank canceled a meeting. Charles Prescott's company saw its stock dip within 48 hours. Not catastrophic, but enough to send board members into a tailspin. Then came the audit requests. An anonymous tip, some say it came from someone inside, suggested shady practices in the Prescott's latest development deal. Tax inconsistencies, misappropriated funds, the kind of whispers that ruined decades of carefully polished image. And Clara. She said nothing. She didn't return calls, didn't respond to messages. Her silence became its own statement, stronger than any public interview. At first, the messages that poured in were venomous. You humiliated us. You planned this from the beginning. Don't think being a Hawthorne makes you better. Clara read them without emotion. They didn't know her before. They certainly didn't know her now. But after a few days, the tone shifted. Please, tell your father to stop. We didn't know who you were. Patrick hasn't eaten. He can't sleep. He regrets everything. Still, she remained silent, because there was nothing left to say. They hadn't hated her because she was unworthy. They hated her because she didn't fit their mold. And when that mold cracked, when it turned out the girl they mocked was actually the one holding the bigger name, they didn't apologize. They panicked. Fear was not the same as remorse. And Patrick. He signed the divorce papers on a Wednesday afternoon. There was no phone call, no apology, no grand gesture. Just an official email from Clara's lawyer, confirming that everything was finalized. Quick, quiet, clean. Exactly how he'd wanted to remove her from his family's dinner table. She didn't cry. She didn't even feel anger anymore. She just felt done. Done with shrinking to fit into places that were never meant for her. Done begging for kindness from people who confused privilege with value. One evening, as she sat in the kitchen of her parents' penthouse, Evelyn brought her a glass of wine. They never saw you, her mother said gently. They only saw their fear. Clara nodded. And now they see consequences. She walked to the window, watching the skyline blink against the night. Below her, the world moved on taxis, crawling lights, flickering people, laughing somewhere far away. She thought about the Prescott name, once so powerful in her mind. And now, just another set of letters buried under their own arrogance. Clara didn't want revenge. She wanted truth. Peace. And now she had both. Because silence, when chosen, is not weakness. It's power. And for the first time in her life, she didn't have to prove she belonged. She knew it. The envelope came on a Thursday. Thin, clinical, its contents predictable. Clara opened it slowly, letting the silence of her parents' penthouse wrap around her. Inside was the final divorce decree, stamped, sealed, completed. No letter from Liam. No handwritten apology. Not even a signature smudged by regret. Just ink. Just paper. Just the end. She stared at it for a long while before placing it in the drawer of her nightstand right beside the wedding photo she no longer looked at. There would be no dramatic goodbye, no need for a final confrontation. The story had already ended the moment he'd slid that money across the table and asked her to disappear. The next morning, Evelyn woke her early. Gregory had already packed the car. "We're going," her mother said, simply passing her a plane ticket. No more headlines. No more noise. Just the three of us. And just like that, Clara stepped into something new. The first stop was Sweden. Snow blanketed the narrow streets of Stockholm like a soft hush. In the mornings, Evelyn brewed tea with orange zest and cardamom, while Gregory read the paper by the fireplace. They didn't talk about the Prescotts. They didn't ask her to explain anything. They simply existed beside her, offering quiet companionship. One night, Clara walked alone across a cobblestone bridge, snow falling into her eyelashes. She paused to watch her breath rise into the cold air and realized she didn't feel abandoned anymore. She felt weightless. From there, they went to Greece. Sunlight spilled over white cliffs, and the sea crashed below like applause from the earth itself. Clara swam in the Aegean, floated on her back, eyes closed, arms stretched wide. She didn't think of Liam. She didn't think of Meredith. She just listened to the water and let it carry her. In France, they settled in a quiet town near the vineyards. One evening, Evelyn sat beside her as they watched the golden hour drape the fields in light. "You never had to prove anything," her mother said softly. "Not to us. Not to anyone." Clara felt tears threaten but didn't let them fall. Instead, she took her mother's hand and held it palm to palm, like she was grounding herself in the truth. "I know," she whispered. "I do now." She didn't hate Liam. That was the strange part. Hate required energy, and she had none left for bitterness. What she felt was distance, like he belonged to a different world. A boy who never figured out how to stand up, and a girl who finally did. Clara didn't return to the city right away. She needed to take her time. She kept a journal, filled it with places she wanted to see, stories she wanted to write, dreams she hadn't spoken out loud in years. She made plans not for revenge, but for renewal. When they finally flew home, it wasn't to pick up the pieces. It was to begin again. Clara moved into a loft of her own. Nothing extravagant, exposed brick, soft rugs, sunlight that poured in like promise. She framed one photo for the living room wall, her and Evelyn standing on a hilltop in southern France, laughing at something no one could remember. One evening, she stood on her balcony arms, resting on the railing wind, brushing her hair back like a farewell. She had been the girl with no name, then the woman they tried to erase. Now she was simply Clara, free, whole, and enough. She didn't need a last name to validate her worth, because the wind knew who she was, and this time it carried her forward, not away,